Okay, let's do this thing, Kalaya.
Let's do this thing, Matt.
It's the Common Table Recap and Reflect podcast.
Awesome.
With Kalaya Rogers and Matt DeGear this week. Representing Tulane, I guess, because I wore that shirt today. Mm-hmm. And Kalaya can represent her alma mater, the Mighty Wolfpack. Oh. So this week, or last week, we talked about truth. Yes. What is truth and how do we find it? Besides Dino Nuggies, which I actually wrote down in my notes, what else stood out to you about our conversation?
I really think what stood out to me the most was how a lot of students came from both sides, which I wasn't really expecting. So we had some students who were focusing on humanities as how they find truth, and then we had other students who were like, well, I rely on the sciences. Or the science. And I thought that was really interesting because coming from my perspective, I really didn't dove into either. For me, it was, I don't even think we had a name for it at that point. I think you even gave it to me at one point. You were like, oh, you find truth and wisdom.
Wisdom.
Yes. Book of Proverbs. And that really opened my eyes a lot more because I see wisdom in science, but I also see wisdom in humanities.
So how do you define wisdom?
So I define wisdom through experience and the experience of others. And then through that, I will see, oh, what you have said is true.
Okay.
So I don't know if that's a definition, but that is the definition that I can think of.
Like many hands make light work.
Yeah. Yeah.
True to life.
True to life.
True to life.
A lot of that. And so one thing I think that really stuck out to me was one student, she had brought up how she uses sciences to explain the how. Mm-hmm. And I thought that was really interesting because the way she delved into it is because it's like, it's very clear and it's very easy to see. And so I was able to relate to her more in the sense of like, well, with me, wisdom is very clear. It's very easy to see. And if you ignore it, then you will then see it later.
Right.
If you don't heed to it. And that was really, I think I felt glad to agree with the student, find a common ground in that way.
Okay.
But then also it was, one thing that I remember us talking about was also how does science prove the why, though? So, for example, I think there was a question you said, like, why do atoms exist? What's the point of them? Like, why were they made in the first place? And I think as a Christian, you start to see that science does not explain the why and simply the how. And so then when we bring God into the aspect, it's like God created us for a reason, which was to glorify him, for if we're on Earth, or I don't know if there's Martians out there or anything, but for Earthlings, we are meant to cultivate the land, we're meant to live on it, prosper it, and stuff like that. So there's a why behind this atom exists, right, so that this atom can interact with it, an atom being a human.
And you got to approach that why from a different perspective of finding truth.
Absolutely.
And wisdom might be a way to do that.
Yeah. Science
can't really answer the why.
Absolutely.
Right. A couple things started out for me. One is one of the history students brought up, and you were talking about this earlier, the different, like the Akkadian names and census people trying to find out what these people's names are. They don't actually speak English back in the day, and so there are lots of different spellings for these people's names. It's like, are there multiple truths to like the spelling of this name or that name? And my response to that is, well, no, there's not more than one truth about those names. Now, the thing is that people were illiterate, and so they didn't know how to spell their name. It was just who they were.
Yeah. So
the truth of the name is the people. Who are the people? That's what really mattered. The people are the truth. And then the name is just it's trying to record like some memory of the truth. So recordings of truth can be all the different sorts. Like if we had the camera, in a different place, this podcast you'd have a different vantage point of the truth of this podcast, whatever truthiness we have. But it doesn't change what actually happened. We could have 100 different cameras around us, but the same thing happened, regardless of your perspective. So our perspective changes, but truth itself stays the same, if such a thing as truth exists. And so a few things I wrote down, pointers to truth that people talked about. People talked a lot about relationships and whether that's or a quality of life. So they might be aspiring to somebody else's quality of life that they find meaningful, that draws them. Or it could even be internal, like I want this kind of life. And so I see that, this kind of wisdom. Yeah. I see that as truth. Or, again, relationships, quality of life, aspiring to character. And then there's sciences and thinking, and there's spiritual experience and emotions, which leads us a little bit towards what next week is. But one little, soapbox moment for me for a
Mm-hmm.
minute. Maybe in both conversations, I can't remember, but at least in one, I kind of made fun of folks who say I believe in science. And this is why. I think people who believe in science are hypocrites, for the most part. Because if we believe in science, I don't think there's any access to the why. We have great access to how. So I'm not like a science denier or a Luddite, which is fun to say. We're using technology right now. And scientists, by their exploration of how the world works, were able to make this cool little microphone, right? The computer that's recording this, the internet that will publicize to this everybody. So science works the how, but why? We have to supply the why from somewhere else. And we all live with some kind of why. Why get up in the morning? Because atoms? Because of chemicals? Like, that's not a why, that's just a how. It explains what is, but not what ought to be. And so none of us really believe in science in that way. We may have confidence in what science can do for us technologically, but we don't believe in it in a sense of trust or confidence like we talked about the week before. What do we really trust or have confidence in? So we don't really believe in science, not in that way. Not really any of us do. Those who do probably go a little bit crazy because they have no purpose. You'd be a total nihilist or nihilist, however you want to pronounce that word. You have your own truth and how you pronounce Nihilist. All that said, one thing that was also fun at Tulane was one of the students, a Christian student, who found it very uncomfortable to express, this is a STEM student, to express that her belief in Christianity as truth had a lot to do with experience, and even spiritual experience,
Really?
which leads us to, this is just a little preamble for, well, probably not happening in 2 days because there's this silly Francine coming to dance with us. So the following week, we'll talk a bit about human irrationality. How rational are we really? And why does it make us uncomfortable if we realize that, wait, we're not just making all of our decisions based on logic and reason? As this student felt last Thursday morning, I'm a Christian because a lot to do with experience. And I'm a science student, and I don't like that. Why don't we like that? And that's the question I'm really interested in. Why don't we like that? So that's all for today.
Okay.
I believe truth is real. I hope you find truth. I hope you become a person that is trustworthy. And I had something else cool to say, but I forgot what it was.
That's all right.
Yeah.
You did a good job.
So,
Did a good job.
this is what it was, the last point. Truth, I believe, exists. Yes? And so, but it's not something you can get inside of your head. You can't just get it all inside of your head because truth is bigger than us.
Yeah.
And so our goal is wherever we find truth, whether it's in science, whether it's in faith, it's in relationships, it's through wisdom, we conform ourselves to the arc of truth. And so we find an edge. We want to fit our lives around that edge and not try to go beyond it. Wherever we find truth, we can find truth, access points and vantage points to truth all over the place. We want to fit our lives around that, not try to just like jam the truth into our head, because we won't. We're not going to be able to fully grasp truth in that way. But we can build our lives in the way of wisdom around the truth that we know. Have a great week. Stay dry and safe, and let's go.